so we have 5 o'clock. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Purva Varsya Patil, and on behalf of the Yashwantrao Chavan Center, I would like to welcome you to the Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs. The Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs is the Chavan Center's newest effort to create a space for dialogue and discussion on public policy, foreign affairs, and political economy, with the aim of having foreign policy directives emerge from strong centers of influence, such as Mumbai, the financial capital of India. This has been possible because of the efforts of Honorable Member of Parliament, Mrs. Supriya Sure, the architect of this event, and the working president of both the Chavan Center and the Nehru Center. The Yashwantrao Chavan Center was established in the year 1985 and has a prolific legacy of work in the field of social development, health, education, arts, and culture. Through its various interventions, the Chavan Center seeks to uphold the liberal and progressive values of the late Shri Yashwantrao Chavan, former Deputy Prime Minister of India and the architect of modern Maharashtra. It is only fitting that this symposium is held here today at the Nehru Center, which is a living testament and a monument of faith to Nehruvian values and the vision that the great Jawaharlal Nehru, the architect of Indian foreign policy, had for India. This is the 8th lecture in our monthly series of the Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs, and we're very excited and honored to have with us two eminent speakers. We have with us Dr. Ajay Godavarti, who will be enlightening us on the rise of populism and why the world has become so illiberal, and Mr. Kumar Ketkarji, who will be presiding over today's program. Dr. Godavarti is an associate professor at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and a notable Indian academic. He has been a visiting fellow at various universities in Canada, Germany, and the United Kingdom. That includes Simon Fraser University, Canada, University of Göttingen, Germany, University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and the Goldsmith College, as well as SOAS in London. He holds a PhD from JNU. He has previously taught at the National University for Juridical Science, Calcutta, and the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. He is the author of Politics Post-Civil Society, Maoism, Democracy and Globalization, Cultural Politics of Modern India, and India After Modi, Populism and the Right. His latest book, Emotive Majority, Ethics and Emotions in New India, is forthcoming. He has contributed to many national and international publications that include the Economic and Political Weekly and Institute of Global Law and Policy at Harvard Law School. Welcome, Dr. Godavarti. We're excited to listen to you. And we're deeply honored to have Mr. Kumar Ketkarji with us today as the chairperson for today's program. While Ketkarji requires no introduction, I shall still try to give one. Ketkarji is a distinguished and accomplished personality in the realms of Indian journalism, politics, and academia. Known for his extensive contributions to the field, Mr. Ketkar has earned a reputation as an insightful commentator, author, and public intellectual. With a career spanning over several decades, he has consistently provided valuable analysis and critical perspectives on a wide range of subjects, including politics, economics, social issues, and international affairs. He was the former editor-in-chief of the Dainik Divya Marathi and Lok Satta newspaper. Apart from his journalistic pursuits, Mr. Ketkar has actively engaged in the political arena. He is a member of Rajya Sabha and represents the state of Maharashtra. His political experience has enriched his perspective and provided him with first-hand insights into the functioning of Indian democracy. Mr. Ketkar's contributions extend beyond journalism and politics. He is also an acclaimed author with several books to his credit. His work covers a wide range of subjects, including politics, social issues, and the Indian freedom movement. Through his writings, he has consistently challenged conventional wisdom and provoked thought, encouraging readers to critically analyze the complexities of Indian society. He was also honored with the Padma Shri in the year 2001. Thank you, sir, for being with us here today. I would now like to request Hemant Takle, sir, and Dr. Sameer Dalwai, trustees of Yashwantrao Chavan Center, to felicitate our guests on the stage. So if we can have our guests and Dr. Dalwai and Takle, sir. Yeah? So first, if we can have the guests on the stage, please. Whichever you prefer. Whichever you prefer.
I think he should. I think he should.
Huh?
Sir? Okay.
Okay, without any further ado, we shall have Dr. Godavarti address the audience. For those who are new, I'd just like to tell you the format of today's program. First, Dr. Godavarti will give his lecture. After that, Ketkarji will give his presidential remarks. And then we open for Q&A. Yeah? I mean, 40 minutes? 40 minutes? 30, 40? 30, yeah?
Just few bullet points. No. What's happened?
This slide.
These things never work.
Slideshow. Just slideshow. Just slide. Second slide. Second slide. Second slide.
Come.
Yes, sir.
Press. Huh? Come. I mean, I can do without PPT, but it might be helpful for. So push the laptop up because I need to put my paper. You know. Yeah. Okay. No problem. No issues. Okay. So let me begin by thanking the Y.S. Chavan Center, Supriyaji, who could not make it today, but for thanks to hosting this event, and Kumar Ketkarji, who I'm sure has a very busy schedule, but has made time for this dialogue today evening. And others who have been working, Purva, and of course my friend Yogesh, who's been taking great care of me since I've come here in spite of, and thanks to this beautiful audience, you have all been here in spite of this scorching heat, Mumbai heat that has been sapping our energies since I've arrived in Mumbai. So let me begin by asking the question for today is as to why has the world become so illiberal? I think many of us in this room would by and large agree to this point that something in the world is changing in very unknown ways. Something is extremely discomforting. The dialogue that we all had sitting outside, it's now in our face that there is a sense of growing illiberality. We refer to it in our everyday parlance in different words of growing hatred, there's growing intolerance. And this is in fact a global phenomenon. It's not unique to India. I think the rise of Trump and his anti-immigrant positions, the locker room dialogue that all of us were privy to before his election. He got elected in spite of that leakage of locker room dialogue. Bolsonaro, election of Bolsonaro in Brazil. Interestingly, I was in Brazil when in the run-up to the elections, and I could see firsthand the kind of excitement among common people with Bolsonaro's candidature. In fact, I was doing an international project, and I was going around asking people as to what is the thing, one thing that excited them so much about Bolsonaro. And you wouldn't believe, many of them said that it is one thing that he announced, that one, his anti-homosexual positions that he took in his very rather ugly kind of a language. The other was, he announced that the first thing he would do after being elected as a president, that he would himself hang drug lords. That as a president, he would be a hangman that he would directly. And this imagination of the president himself being directly hangman who would, execute criminals, excited people, that I used to meet a lot of them in evenings in my pub visits. And the mention of Bolsonaro, some of them would break into dance. That this is the man we were waiting for all through, and we finally heard. Turkey, and we are closely keeping a watch on what's happening in Turkey with Erdogan's results. I was in Turkey a couple of months back, and there is a similar kind of jubilation with Mr. Erdogan's presidentship. The dominant Sunni Muslims are very strongly behind, and the reason they feel is he's a very strong, they say he's a masculine president. So that's what the shopkeepers told me, that why they love Erdogan so much. And of course, in unstated ways, anti-Kurdish position that is nothing to hide. It's in your face kind of a thing. And question of Germany, that if some of you would recollect that not long back in Cologne there was a neo-Nazi march, a very big march that took place in Cologne with slogans of that were fairly racist and anti-immigrant, calling for mass genocidal violence. Even in social democratic welfare countries like Sweden, that you had the anti-immigrant rights, which we thought that at the Scandinavian countries figured very high on welfare, and there was a fair amount of harmony, and these countries are relatively stable nations. Even there were impromptu riots that broke up. And what to speak of India? I think you all know better than me that that many scholars have been referring to India as increasingly converting itself into a kind of an electoral autocracy or ethnic democracy. That's the way scholars have been responding to. So there is no running away from the fact that increasingly democracies across globe, irrespective of they being developed, underdeveloped, whether they're part of the global north or global south, there is something happening to democracies that we don't completely understand. And I strongly believe that old categories in which we have framed questions of democracy don't really explain this global phenomenon. There must be other reasons that one should really look for. What is it why is it that world has become so illiberal? There must be some reasonings which is one thing to offer a moral critique and feel this great discomfort with illiberality. That we all do anyways. But there's no point in stopping there. One has to go beyond to explain that what could be the possible reasons that it might be somewhat historical to say that people across globe have suddenly become very intolerant or suddenly have started to learn to hate. So that's not how societies change. There must be something brewing in societies that has culminated in something which is so visible and which is also so visceral in terms of its hatred politics. So the points that I trace here broadly would inform you about my trajectory. My recent book titled Politics, Ethics and Emotions in New India, also partly. So my work for last few years has been in terms of mapping and tracking this kind of a global shift. I do political theory kind of work, but I'm not going to bore you with theoretical formulations today evening. Keep it pretty lucid in terms of communicating as to the basic thrust of the points and formulations that have made. by and large, we would all also agree, I think, liberal values, as we understood, in terms of broadly, in popular parlance, we understand them as constitutional values, what Ambedkar referred to as constitutional morality, broadly in terms of equal moral worth, a sense of mutuality and reciprocity, rule of law, separation of powers, protection for minority rights, certain celebration of equality, liberty, human rights, autonomy of institutions. All of this across globe in one way or the other is under stress. As Gramsci once said, old is dying, but the new is yet to born. So that we do not know where we are heading towards. And this has nothing to do with governments and certain political parties being voted in and voted out. I think this is a tectonic sociological change that is coming across globe. And I think there are new questions being raised which we will need to address, that it is not just an electoral thing that if you push out certain political parties, I mean, already Trump is out, Bolsonaro is out, for all you know, Erdogan might be out. We are all also, as you know, waiting with bated weight of 2024, what is going to happen in India. Hopefully, Turkey and US will repeat in India, but we don't know. But the point is that it's not merely about these electoral outcomes. I mean, these are short-term symptoms that will come and go. But there are, I think, we'll have to address whichever political party with whatever ideological persuasion comes with. There are, I think, long-term sociological changes which we will have to take head on. So those are the 5. There are a lot more I trace in my book, but I prefer to put these 4 or 5 points for your consideration. One, I think globally, culture has come back in a very big way. Democracy we usually spoke about through political economy frame. We talked either about institutions, or we spoke more about questions of economic justice, that social justice is one issue that we always discussed. But somewhat distinct from these, I think culture is now hit right in our face, that we'll have to deal with culture. And these are cultural questions, but it's also a little more complex. It is a cultural framing of questions of economic justice and political questions. So one, why is culture big in such a big way? I would refer you to this English scholar, very interesting book, The Road to Somewhere, David Goodhart. He makes a very interesting formulation. I use it in some of my work. He says that no longer globally at some point in 50s, he says economic inequalities were the key defining fault line across globe. We also divided nations in terms of their development, global north, global south, core and periphery. If some of you are aware of, these were the terminologies that were in global circulations in terms of defining nations where they belong. Class was a very big category. Social structures, very big, gender, race. But he says something unique has happened with the turn of the century in 2000. And he says the new global fault line is between what he refers to as somewheres and anywheres. Somewheres, he says, are those who are territorially bound, culturally rooted. It could be ethnic, it could be nationality identities, it could be local identities, it could be linguistic identities. And he gives very interesting strategies that even in an advanced capitalist country like Britain, 60% of British people still live within 20 miles of where they lived when they were born, where their forefathers lived. So people don't prefer to move out beyond 20 miles radius. This is the lot which sees life through the lens of ascriptive identities that they're born into, in terms of cultural, local preference. Then there is a tiny minority which he calls anywheres. Perhaps many of us in this room would belong to that anywheres, which he says is the open, cosmopolitan, liberal elites, who are open for intercultural mixing, who are open to speak other languages, who are open to travel across globe like many of us do. We are curious about other cultures and cuisines. Like when I travel, I often would want to eat local food. I don't go searching for idlis when I go to Europe or I see many of my relations when they come to Delhi, they compel me to take idli. I tell them, यहाँ पे भी आके idli खाना चाहते हो, they say नहीं idli ही खाना है शाम को. So you can see this is the difference, that some who are closed, who have finite identities in terms of cultural lifestyle, they have complete discomfort with any new culture, intervening. Then there is a tiny cosmopolitan who became over a period of time through constitutional means the new kind of social elites, that they are open, they are cosmopolitan, and they are the ones who are the social base of liberal values. They are the ones who I think who opened up societies and kind of privileged this global modernist view that, it's good to be cosmopolitan, it's good to be open, it's good to be, intermixing, that we are all open even for intercaste or interreligious marriages. That was a kind of the vision. What this has led to is that modernity has pushed, what many philosophers from beginning with Nietzsche to Heidegger refer to as a sense of being uprooted. I think large sections of social groups, large cultural groups, simply are unable to cope with the pace of global change. At the rate in which nation states are changing, the rate in which a post-Westphalian order has come, the rate in which we are all now introduced to a kind of a global village, we are told we are all part of, that at one hand we celebrate that idea of global village, but deep beneath, I think there is a deep discomfort in terms of the pace of change that globalization is bringing. And it is this bulk, it's only that tiny lot which is comfortable, which kind of celebrates that opening, but it is the majority of these somewheres. Somewheres, by somewheres he means somewheres who have a belonging to some place. They are the ones who are extremely uncomfortable with this kind of collapsing of national cultural boundaries. What this has also done, I think, is that modernity has pushed through constitutional, legal, institutional means certain kind of legal rationality, certain kind of a modernist rationality, which has led to what cultural socialist Zygmunt Bauman says, that all that liberalism expects us is to have ad hoc commitments in life. Everything in one sense has become very contractual. While this somewheres do not believe in that modern rationality, do not believe in ad hoc commitments, but they are looking for very deep sense of belonging. They are looking for very authentic sense of belonging. They are looking for deep faith, something to trust very deeply. That urge to trust something very deeply, which is, I think, getting expressed through the rise of, Babas and cult, religious figures. This entire change in the political domain, that from representation we have moved to identification, that we identify with the leader. We don't think leader is a representative of our demands, but we deeply identify. So by and large, my first formulation would be that it is this deep sense, urge for deep sense of belonging that people are looking for, an authentic kind of living, a direct kind of a living, where they can, in an unadulterated way, trust something, put their faith on something. By itself, it may not be a very illiberal thing to do that. So this is the first question that we'll have to think, that it is by and large the failure of modernity that this search and this urge for deep sense of belonging is being somewhere uprooted, is being destabilized and disturbed. And this is where I think right-wing political mobilizations get a deep sense, and I think a very correct sense, that this is what is going on in the world, and therefore they convert that search for sense of belonging into jingoism, into hyper-nationalism, into. So for our critique of right, our critique of illiberality should not miss this deeper point. So what often happens is that the moment social elites and cosmopolitans like us begin to call the entire process as being very illiberal, then you miss the source. That actually further deepens the anxiety, cultural anxieties of these groups who wish to be local, authentic, speak local flavor. So my first question to you would be, I will raise questions and leave it at that. for you to come back and we could kind of discuss on this that, so I see one of the big sources of this illiberality is a deep sense of belonging. That if we fail to look into that reasoning and simply dismiss the entire thing as being some kind of intolerance and hatred and illiberality, I think we will be throwing the baby with the bathwater. So how do we retrieve, how do we offer people that deep sense of belonging without that sense of belonging being necessarily, intolerant, toxic majoritarianism, without it being casteist, without it being masculine? So that's the question. So all these, to my mind, I think are distorted forms of search for belonging. And therefore, the larger project that we should be, those of us who are on the, would want to identify as progressive, social democratic, left, broadly centrist, so on and so forth, will have to plug into these deeper sociological, historical, and conceptual trajectories and histories if we want to move away from this illiberal kind of politics. So my first proposition would be that's one major source of illiberality. Second major source of illiberality is something that is a very interesting thing that has happened in the world in the last 30, 40 years is a kind of a deep tension and contestation between a process of social democratization with shrinking economic opportunities. I think by and large, many of us sitting here would agree that an imagination of social equality, I think, has reached all nook and cranny of world. I think today there would be no acceptance if somebody were to claim a natural superiority of caste or gender or race or things of that kind. You could also see in our everyday interactions that subaltern castes and groups no longer take misbehavior. Even routine incivility is being resisted. You can't talk down to auto drivers, taxi drivers. They respond back. It doesn't matter how rich and how well off and how powerful you are. If you misbehave with people, bearers. When I was a child, when we used to go with our parents, it was a very routine affair to talk down towards all these subaltern castes. But today, they resist. So I think a sense of dignity, a question of self-respect, a question of legitimate recognition, the right to be treated with dignity, whether it's women, whether it is people coming from non-caste Hindu backgrounds, I think it's very, very clear. It's very, very distinct. So I think there has been a large scale across globe, a very entrenched process of social democratization. And I say that there are three reasons why this social democratization has happened. One, I think massive spread of education in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Even if you take statistics in India, there has been a steady rise in the literacy rate in India. It has grown from 61% in 2001 to 74.37% in 2018. And the figures are much higher if you go to Europe and other parts of the world. So the literacy rates, I think, have gone up a lot. And education in Indian case, as we know, is one big tool for social mobility. It's not merely a tool for employment. It's not merely a tool for skills, as Skill India program want us to understand that education is not merely a basic skill here. Education is a big escape route to from social maladies, and it's actually a route for social emancipation and social mobility. So spread of education, and perhaps one reason why there is so much of crisis in education sector today under the current government. Both primary education, 2018 report says more than 71,000 primary government schools have got closed down across India. And just when over 11,000 private schools have opened up. So if you look at the data, it's very, very startling. And all of us are privy to the deep crisis in higher education institutions across India. Coming from JNU, you are hearing from horse's mouth that how higher education institutions of premium quality have been treated under this regime. But interesting part is that it is not restricted to one government. I come from a state of Telangana, and you all know from in Maharashtra, I was talking to Yogesh, education funding is in deep crisis across states in India. It is cutting across all governments, whether they're centrist, whether they're left, whether they're right, whatever parties they might be, there's a huge fund crisis for education. And that's what something it has to do with this link between education and process of social democratization as to why the education is such a big, and if you read details, I'm not going to go into the details of national education policy, you would know what the long-term vision of education is at one basic level is to cut off that link between education and social democratization. Second big reason, I think, spread of market and technology. I think spread of market is today pretty much complete in India. 30 years back, I think we didn't have market. There are bankers sitting here who should tell us more on this, that 30, 40 years, India was not so integrated with big roads being built, infrastructural growth. I see my own village when I go back to Telangana, that there has been a lot more integration that has happened in terms of both through market and technology. Therefore, this whole earlier idea of high culture and low culture, I think, have just collapsed. And Europe went through that process 50 years back. I think India is currently going through this process that there is no high and low culture. People may not be able to afford. I mean, Bombay is a very good example of this, that fashion quotient of Bombay is fairly high. People may not be able to afford a Gucci bag, but you can buy a look-alike bag. That's a good make-do. You should all watch that movie Gucci, where they have this dialogue that the younger scion is worried that so many look-alike Gucci bags are selling on the wayside, but the old one says that it's good, let them buy, but the rich will only buy the original. So there is no threat of. But the point is that if you travel in Delhi now, I travel from my South Delhi place to JNU. There are lower middle class colonies. I watch those girls, young girls and boys, all of them with low-cut jeans and with Gucci look-alike bags hanging with a mobile phone they're all carrying. So I think technology and market in Indian context, they're empowering. People can claim at least they know where they need to belong. They know what are the recent fashion trends. So this earlier business that you had high culture and you had then the low culture, I think no longer works. It has got fairly democratized. Fashion trends, technologies have got, I think, fairly democratized. Technology, mobile phone, I think, has been a liberating force. It has been the new God. After Nietzsche said God is dead, the new God is the mobile phone. You find literally everyone, whatever class, caste they belong to, mobile is a very dignifying equipment that people hold on to. One should raise why. I think because if you look at photography, that's a very interesting thing, that earlier to be a good photographer, you were told that you had to capture a unique moment. But today with mobile phones, you don't capture a unique moment, you create unique moments. So everybody can be a good photographer if you have a good quality mobile phone. So that's what I mean when I say that this access to technology, access to market, consumption patterns. David Harvey, a geographer, says that Netflix, he refers to Netflix as a non-exclusionary commodity. That is, if one is consuming it, it doesn't exclude the others. People simultaneously can consume Netflix. So I think this kinds of new Netflix kind of thing, I think I've evened out. I've made things more flatter. The people in my lower middle class and what we watch in TV are today pretty much the similar serials. They are not very, very different. People are watching those who come from, even I talk to my students who come from offices, they're all watching South Korean serials, they're watching Turkish serials, they're watching Pakistani serials. So it's a great social leveler and democratizer. Third, I think, is democracy. Third great potential force of social democratization is the very electoral process. That the fact that it has a deep value of one person, one value. This whole ethic of one person, one value, that whether you are rich or poor, with whatever caste you might belong to, on the day of election, it doesn't matter. Every person carries the same. That's why you see India is in that sense very unique, that we are perhaps one of the few countries in the world where, in spite of all the crises in governance and democracy, voter turnout is increasing every year. Look at recent Karnataka elections, it is well over 74%. Look at Chhattisgarh and state central India, where you have so-called Maoist movement which is calling for boycott of elections. voter turnout is well over 75%. So our average is almost now 70% of voter turnout. So people heavily invest in electoral politics, not because they think governments are going to respond and do some magic, but this ethic behind it, that on that day of election, you are equal to everyone else. You don't bother whether it's Tata's or whether it is Tendulkar's, you are the same. We all go out and vote as citizens. So democracy, I think, in this political, in the sense of this ethic, has been a great leveler. But as the process of social democratization has been deepening post-1990s, with global economic reforms, with neoliberalism, with structural adjustment, with market fundamentalism taking over our social life, I think there has been a deep shrinking of economic opportunities and exponential rise of economic inequalities. So I feel that this tension between, on one hand, there's a heavy consciousness of social democratization. You feel you're equal in terms of gender or in terms of caste or in terms of other social indicators. But in terms of concrete material opportunities, there are people out there who cannot translate this imagination into a reality. That you face everyday indignities because of your poor economic opportunities. That you can't afford good schooling, you can't afford a good job, you can't afford a healthy meal, you can't afford up-to-date technology, and people are deeply conscious these days. People are aware what they're missing out on. There was a generation like my parents, who are simply not aware. I take my father to a very expensive restaurant, he will order the same food that he eats at home. He wouldn't mind which food, how expensive. It's not a marker for them. I keep telling, I make it a point telling him I brought you to a very good restaurant. It doesn't sink in. It doesn't matter what the bill is. But today's generation, we are all very conscious. We know what are those layers, what are the difference, which car, automobiles, the entire advertisement industry is spread. So I think there is a deep stress, social stress that is created through this unevenness. That socially you feel competent and equal, but economic opportunities are deeply uneven, are deeply very unequal. This, I think, produces what in my work I call as the new political subjectivity. This is one big source for rise of illiberal civic socialization. People have become, so people need to compensate this unevenness in their everyday life. This is an everyday existential indignity you're facing. You're very aware, but the mobile you're carrying is not an up-to-date mobile. I carry the old Nokia, and my students ask me, sir, किस चोर बाजार से आप लेके आए हो? ये कहाँ मिलता है आजकल? So just to make a point that people can still live a dignified life without the up-to-date. But my students think this is a bizarre thing I do, that I'm not on WhatsApp, I'm not on Twitter. They say, sir, you are missing a lot of action out there. But people face this every day. If you're not up to date, if you're not carrying a Mac, I see the younger generation, they're completely aware, those who come from official towns, the kind of stress they feel in common spaces like universities, when they are comparing with others who live, kind of clothing. Earlier a shirt was a shirt, but today we are aware, there is linen, whatnot, what brand, we are all very deeply aware. And people who can't afford are even more aware than rest of those who can afford. They know the layered reality of what is available in the market. This, I think, to a big extent globally has contributed to aggression. That this aggressive behavior, I feel, what we for us looks as a very visible growth of intolerance, as a visible growth of hatred, as a visible growth of illiberality, comes from this tension. That this is a one way people cope with. Similarly, one can dig into it. There are a lot of formulations that I make in my writings in terms of how to understand this. People are forced to also fantasize. That how do you have to fantasize being equal to others, because simply in reality, what the reality is very harsh and very stark, and that indignity hits you very hard. But it's only an escape route in fantasy that you cope and imagine that you are equal to the other person. Therefore, it also leads to kind of projected victimhood. All this dominant caste from Patidars to Jats to Gujars today demanding reservation. They're saying, claiming that we are the most highly victimized. In fact, even Brahmins in India claim we are persecuted and ostracized. We are the losers. So every caste, in one sense, is beginning to feel this deep victimhood. And that partly, that hyper claim of victimhood also comes from this generic condition of unevenness between your social awareness, your social status, and your shrinking economic opportunities. I think part of support for totalitarian, authoritarian leaders and demagogueries comes from this tension. That we see that realization, self-realization of this, our own existential, incompetence, failure. We see it realized in strong men. In populism, we refer to this phenomenon of strong men. Somebody who is very strong, somebody who is very masculine. So that's, I think, is a compensatory mechanism for. Therefore, if we simply cannot afford to dismiss this entire celebration of strong men as merely some kind of a growing hatred or intolerance. If you want to address that growing illiberality, you'll have to address this underlying social reality of unevenness between that democracies have successfully instilled social democratization, but democracies have also turned neoliberal post-1990s in Indian case, which have also exacerbated economic inequalities. My third point is the question that all of us, I think, debate day in and day night for the last 10 years, is secularism dead? Again, my broad argument is that old terms and old imagination of secularism does not work. I think that categories are the same, but we'll have to raise this whole question. Therefore, I'm not a great champion of going back and referring to Nehruvian secularism or abstract idea of constitution, abstract celebration of democracy. I think that's not going to get us out of the kind of majoritarian impasse that we are facing. We need to move on. I mean, they raised, whether it's Nehru, whether it's Gandhi or Ambedkar, raised questions that were relevant and complex in their own times. And I think in the last 50, 60 odd years, societies have changed beyond recognition. So they were raising questions that were universal to their times, but we cannot simply take their ideas and think that they will provide us ready-made solutions to problems that we are facing in the current times. We'll have to re-signify, transform their ideas, engage with them, but I don't think the ideas that as they are present in their writings are directly relevant to the questions we are. So secularism is one such good crisis, one such big crisis we are facing across globe again, nothing specific to India. To understand why secularism is in crisis, or to even begin to understand what does the crisis of secularism actually mean, you should all take a look at the Pew Research Survey. The New York-based research organization, couple of years back, conducted one of the largest surveys, and the title of the survey was India and its tolerance. That was based on the tolerance survey, that how tolerant is India. And they came up with some very fascinating findings. This was a survey cutting across caste. This was a survey cutting across metropolitans and mofusils. This was a survey cutting across religious denominations. They interviewed Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. Invariably, all of them said that we all value diversity. We value diversity as an abstract value. But they said, when it comes to concrete everyday living, we do not want to cohabit together. We do not want Muslims in our areas. Christians would say we do not want Hindus in our areas. The report's formulation is, India is now proponent of living together separately. They say that it's good for India to have Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. It's good to have this religious diversity. It is good to have linguistic diversities. It is good to have regional diversities. They all realize this is very good for democracy. Very interesting. And a startling revelation of this survey is that those who voted for BJP, in fact, value diversity higher than those who have not voted for BJP. But they all believe beneath that as an abstract value, as an ethical value, diversity is celebrated. That's the imagination of India we all have. But when it comes to the concrete, they said that we don't want to live with people of other religions and castes. How does one even begin to understand this kind of a new social reality? Does this mean we have become secular in a different way? And what should be our notion of secularism in this context? I think part of the crisis of those who are pitching for secularism against this kind of religious majoritarian orders, whether in Turkey, whether in white working class in United States, whether even in Europe with a new Christian identity, kind of a renewal of new Christian identity, is that we are not very clear as to what we mean by secularism. By secularism, for instance, are we meaning that we should have common cohabitation of religious groups under common neighborhoods? Do we mean by secularism we should encourage interreligious marriages? We don't know. We are all very confused, that at the most we say it's about individual choice. Or we would say we have a minimalist idea of secularism would mean that basic social guarantees to religious minorities. Beyond this, we are not very clear in terms of what is the direction at least we need to push. Like Ambedkar was very clear in anti-caste, he said interdining and intermarriage is a concrete strategy to break caste system. But when it comes to interreligious, should we also that we should encourage actively interreligious marriages to make India more secular? I think that will be a very startling thing. I was on the invite of Muslim Education Society in Kerala, Malappuram, a couple of years back, and they introduced me with a lot in bombastic terms, and they said, sir, you should come every year to our college. And in course of my talk on secularism, I said that we should imbibe Ambedkar's philosophy in terms of interreligious marriage, and trust me, I have not been invited since then to MES. So I don't think even minorities would want to see interreligious marriage as a way out from this current impasse. So I think that there's a deep conceptual, ethical crisis of imagination. We really do not know at what level we are talking about in terms of this solidarity. We would want to preserve identities as they exist. That's what has also been the experience of Europe. Europe had the idea of secularism till 70s, 80s, which broadly meant separation of politics and religion, which meant certain guarantees of civil and political and social rights to religious minorities. But after 70s, they moved to multiculturalism. They said this abstract notion of secularism does not work. We need to have multiculturalism, which would mean a possible recognition by the state of cultural diversities. And what did that multiculturalism translate into? When I was in Denmark, 5-6 years back, a friend of mine took me out for a walk in Copenhagen. He said, let's go for a walk. I'll show you around how Copenhagen looks. Then he said, this is white colony. Then we walked. Then he said, this is South Asian colony. Then he said, this is Hispanics. This is Bangladeshi. For my Indian sensibilities, that was very shocking. That to have such clearly demarcated, habitations. I said, India may not be at the top, but even we do not have this kind of very clearly demarcated. If you go walk across Mumbai, you wouldn't say that this is a place where Bangladeshis live, this is a place where, certain people of certain caste live or certain religion. We are heading in that direction, but that's extremely discomforting for our Indian sensibilities. But Europeans thought this was a good idea. That multiculturalism meant people live with their own cultural groupings, and that would lead to some stability and peace and familiarity. This is what Slovakian philosopher Zizek says. This is racism at a distance. That is, you discriminate by people by keeping them at a distance. That you segregate them in such a way that, which is what is happening with Indian Muslims today, that you want to segregate them and you say that this is perfectly all right because different caste and religious groups want to live within familiar atmosphere. Why at all have cohabitation? So Europe itself, in spite of its enlightenment, had this kind of a long legacy of multiculturalism which led to social ghettoization of groups. That they could not possibly imagine robust intercultural mixing. that the only way they could preserve identities was through social distancing and social ghettoization, which is what India is going through. So secularism, multiculturalism, all ended up in places that, that have created great discomfort. Unless you want to do a counterintuitive reading like sociologist Ashish Nandi does. You know, Nandi once visited Kochi and he said, Kochi is the most secular society in Kerala. And he said, why? Because there are Hindus, Muslims and Christians in almost approximately same number with equal social and economic power, and all three communities hate each other. But they all know that one cannot do anything to the other, so they live peacefully. So he said it is extreme dislike which is a source of peace. So unless you want to do this kind of a counterintuitive reading of what is good about social ghettoization, I think one big crisis of those of us who are talking about making India more secular would be to raise this question of what Dr. Ambedkar said, his emphasis on fraternity. That today I think there is a context where we need to read, we need to have more concrete social imagination of what this fraternity would actually mean. And how is that we are going to balance the demands of fraternity with the urge of social, caste and religious groups to preserve their own identities. You know, where do we draw the lines? You know, right is very clear that they want segregated identities and they want hierarchical arrangement. One of the advantages with right is absolute clarity. And a big disadvantage with our project is we are completely confused. And part of the confusion is this, that we do not know how far to push solidarity. Because this question of, for instance, interreligious marriage could well mean that minorities might feel this is one way that you were going to kind of colonize their identities. So they wouldn't be happy with. So what other forms can we think of in terms of, if secularism in our popular imagination means greater fraternal feelings between religious and caste communities, what should be its concrete social form? I think we are absolutely not clear about that. Part of that confusion is what comes across as this growing illiberality and intolerance. My fourth point quickly would be, I think we have moved to an age of emotions. Yeah. We have 20th century, as many of you know, was referred by Eric Hobsbawm as age of revolutions. I think 21st century, I would call it, is an age of emotions. I think a whole range of new way of social life has come about where there's a different existential issues that have emerged in the public and political realm. You know, at one point we were calculating development through GDP, and then we said that's not a good idea. Amartya Sen said GDP does not account for social development, so we need capabilities approach. Then we moved to social development index. But today we are looking at happiness index. We are raising this question of what is a good life? That, you might have socially and economically developed countries, but those are not necessarily happy countries. Japan is a highly industrialized country, but Tokyo is called the suicide capital of the world. They are suffering from celibacy syndrome. I don't know how many of you are following, but United Kingdom, a couple of years back, has officially inaugurated Ministry of Loneliness. Loneliness is now an epidemic in much of Europe. Social transformation itself is bringing newer questions which are very, very existential in nature. And these cannot be captured through legal rationality, through institutional logic, through economic questions of redistributive justice. These are very hands-on, existential issues that people are facing. And this is, I think, clearly visible all across the globe. Some of my friends in UK have written that one of the reasons for rise of populism across globe, they say, is the rise of global regimes of boredom. That people are extremely bored in today's life. Life has become very repetitive. There is a pervasive sense of anomie and meaninglessness. So boredom, he says, as against excitement and intensification, is one big reason of a crisis of modernity. So I can go on to the range of emotions that I think today have become the way people relate to collective life. And this cannot be captured through old discourses of social development, economic indicators, secularism, state, law, so on and so forth. This would need that we need to, and I think one thing that right always does is that I think they are comfortable with this idea of mobilizing on the basis of emotions. Of course, the kind of emotions that they mobilize, we are uncomfortable with. But again, we should not throw the baby with the bathwater. That are we uncomfortable with the kind of emotions that right is mobilizing, or are we uncomfortable with the very idea of bringing emotions into public domain? I think emotions have always existed. We always shied away. We thought institutions and constitutions are big check. But today's nature of existential issues, some of which I have mentioned, loneliness, boredom, fear, anxiety, are all up in the public domain. And therefore, a big question that globally that is being discussed is that should state directly mobilize around questions of emotions, ethics, and values? Our general sense is that it is going to lead to a very illiberal society, because we often think that these are very personal, private issues. Many of us have to handle these questions of emotional dissonance in a private sense. But today there is a kind of a collective cultural trauma that is very, very visible. You know, that the way, for instance, partition memory is being revived in this country is a question of collective emotions that are being mobilized. Therefore, the fourth question that I raise for your consideration is that emotions themselves are not illiberal. Emotions themselves are not irrational. Emotions are also deeply evaluative. They are not merely unreflective experiences that human beings have, that we also evaluate our own personal life through emotions, right? So fourth question would be, what would it mean for progressive, left, secular parties and societies to kind of mobilize alternate emotions? What would those alternate emotions be against the kind of emotions we're witnessing? It could be care, it could be compassion, it could be love. And our mythologies, myths, I think, are all full of examples of ethics of compassion, care, alongside things that might be objectionable. So how are we going to intervene? What kind of alternative mobilization? Can we have policies based on this? If you look at national education policy, it is very, very clear. It says that modern education is not merely about developing cognitive abilities and critical thinking, but it is about giving emotions. It is developing people, allowing people to reflect. I think it's a very powerful idea. Because if you look at education very closely, for deep interpersonal everyday problems that we face, our education is literally irrelevant. It simply doesn't help you to know people with depression, people with emotional dissonance, with the interpersonal fights we have with our partners. Our education says next to nothing. You are left on your own, and that is the place where right is intervening. That's where they are saying what is right and wrong, so on and so forth. They, of course, have a very controlled idea of morality. That might be a problem. But I think this is a zone where modern secular has to intervene if you do not want that kind of rise of illiberality. I'm almost running out of time. Purva has already given, so I will conclude quickly with my last point on problem of valuation that we're facing is that there is a terrible fluidity of identities that has also happened. That modernity has also brought fluidity of identities. I think we are moving away from those stable identities of men and women, rich and poor, Brahmin and Dalit. These were stable conflicts. They were conflicts, but these were at least assuringly stable conflicts. I think for that kind of old conflicts are past. And we are into a new situation where there are multiplicity of identities proliferating. Like if you take Dalits, there are conflicts within intra-Dalit conflicts, sub-caste conflicts are happening. If you take Muslims, there is a question of Pasmanda Muslims. There is a question of gender. If you take rich and poor, there is a question of multiple layers of middle class itself. Today we are defining in terms of multiple layers, upper middle class, middle, and lower middle. So every class, there is a multiplicity of identities. What this multiplicity of identities does is that it creates what I call the problem of valuation. That is, we do not know who is above and who is below. Old conflicts at least had stability. We know Brahmins are above, Dalits are below, it's considered below in the social hierarchy. You know what to fight. You know that Hindus are above, majority Muslims are below, you know what to fight. But in this new context that we are facing, with the proliferation of identities, If I might ask you a few questions like, how would you compare an OBC man with a poor upper caste woman? Who would you value above and who would you value below? I can go on. I have a number of examples of this kind. And I think part of the reason we have this idea of post-truth, fake news, rise of perceptions, irrelevance of data and evidence is because we really do not know how to value these things. So women think OBC are men after all, so they are more powerful. OBC men think these are upper caste women, privileged after all, never seen caste discrimination, so they think they are much above. If you talk about Dalits and Muslims, there is no concrete way we can evaluate. Muslims think that we are the ones ostracized. Dalits think that we are the ones who have experienced untouchability. Muslims have never. They have in fact been ruling elites of this country. It is this quantum of problem of valuation that the right today mobilizes in terms of toxic, fake news, creation of perceptions. So if you simply look at fake news, post-truth, perceptions as something right-wing political propaganda strategy, you will never get to the bottom of the problem. You have to tell us this problem of valuation is a real big-time sociological problem. And we do not know how to value them because gender and caste, we do not know how to value which comes first, which comes second. Because women sometimes face, even if they're upper caste, if they are socially privileged, they sometimes face domestic violence. Dalit men may not face that kind of violence, but they face untouchability. Now, how will you value domestic violence versus untouchability? If you look at a scheme like EWS, it is precisely geared towards based on those kinds of built-in perceptions. So I think these are the 5, if we can take on board and build an alternative political and social discourse, that is when I think we can defeat illiberalism globally. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Godavarti. That was a very enlightening lecture. And now we'll have Kumar Ketkarji for his presidential address. Wherever you prefer.
Well, actually, after this very perceptive, convincing, and detailed narrative that we just heard, I think everybody must be introspecting as to what is happening to themselves personally and to collectively to our society or global society. So I will not repeat any point, despite being in chair, which is supposed to summarize what the main speaker has said. He has said so much, it will be impossible to summarize. So chair's job is very difficult. So what I will do is I will raise some issues which perhaps because of time, he has not been able to place before us. So I will raise these issues. They are issues and also partly questions to him, but also my own way of making a statement. So whichever way you look at it. I think I should not be giving more than, say, 10-15 minutes of narrative, perhaps less, and then the floor is open for all of you. And I think we have to finish by 6:55, if I'm right. So one issue that I will place before you is exactly at which point of time, not exactly in terms of 3:30 and 22nd December, not like that, but exactly at which point of time, historically, illiberalism got set in. Were we illiberal? Let us say in 1965, there was the Indo-Pakistan War. Were we illiberal in 1947 and 48 when there was a Holocaust and Hindus killed Muslims and Muslims killed Hindus and both migrated from one place to other, and yet we discussed partition? But despite all that Holocaust, and nearly 1 crore or more people died and so many became homeless both sides, yet the country continued smoothly after 1950, particularly after we became republic. And I don't think anybody, when I was in school or in college, I don't think anybody discussed either Hindu-Muslim question or Pakistan. There was Pakistan. And there used to be cricket matches. And there used to be admiration for Pakistani cricketers. I remember some names like Hanif and others. And India-Pakistan matches were held in Mumbai, Delhi, everywhere, Kolkata also. So that hatred, despite Holocaust, despite 47, despite killing so many people, that did not generate the kind of Hindu-Muslim heat of conflict. As it were, at that time, I think right up to 1970, 71, when India participated in the war to liberate Bangladesh, there was a grand welcome, and even Pakistan's liberal society welcomed it. And no Muslim country supported Pakistan. Indira Gandhi managed the support of almost all Islamic countries supported India in fighting Pakistan to liberate Bangladesh. And Bangladesh was recognized quickly by many countries. If Pakistan was supported, it was ironically supported, the dictatorship of Yahya Khan was supported ironically by the most democratic country known as the United States. They supported. Similarly in Vietnam, if democracy was crushed, it was by America, the democratic country, which crushed the democracy there in the name of crushing communism. Ho Chi Minh was not that kind of a classical communist like Stalin or something. Ho Chi Minh was promoting nationalist democracy with socialist bent of ideology, and yet he was crushed. So even then, at that point of time, there was not so much of illiberalism globally or internally, though we know that the black-white question did exist in US. There were blacks and there were whites, and because of that discrimination, in 1969-70, the Black Panther was born. Now, Black Panther was imitated in India, particularly in Maharashtra, by Dalit Panther. So it is not as if there were no such issues, and yet I don't think we, even in America, were as illiberal as we consider ourselves today. Almost every single, I happened to be working in IIT Powai at that time, almost every single student, without exception, 100%, every single student's aim and dream was to go to US. I think much of that even continues today. It is not as if it was only then. But at that time, the difference was they wanted to go there because they thought it was a land of liberty. Also, they wanted prosperity, they wanted opportunities, everything was there. But essentially what attracted them was the idea of liberty. Hollywood had strengthened those ideas of liberty. Hollywood also projected the kind of problems America was facing. The magazines like Life and Time highlighted the issues that made America so sick. In fact, there were so many books called Sick Society, American Illness, and all kinds of things were happening, but they were discussed in quite open atmosphere. So at which point did the globe become illiberal, or India became illiberal? I remember the first signs of illiberalism here came on the public domain was when Garam Hawa film was made, Baldar Sahni. That time there was some kind of a ripple in society that, well, things are not so smooth. But in my class, in my school, which was not a semi-urban, actually it was village come city school in Chembur, all the people coming from Ghatla village. And I did not know who were Brahmins and who were Bhandaris and who were Kolis and who were Malis, and nothing I knew. There were a couple of Muslim students, we never recognized them as Muslims. Same in college. Today, the first question asked is about your caste or religion or ethnicity. Not exactly color every time, but sometimes even color is identified. So that was not there in 1950, it was not in the screen, 1970, not during emergency, in 1975, 1980, in 1984-85, after Indira Gandhi's assassination, though there was little tension, only in Delhi there was some kind of massacre of Sikhs, but the rest of India did not really have, except a few cases in Indore, in some other place, Bhopal and other places. But in Mumbai, for instance, Sikhs were not particularly attacked, though the fear was so much that suddenly all the taxi drivers who were Sikhs disappeared. But even then, it was what you can say in a manageable level. So even in 1985, the debate mainly used to be whether there should be computer. Computerization was the debate. And nobody discussed Ayodhya Mandir, though it came after 1987, nobody discussed Wahi Mandir banayenge. 1985, 86, the debate was whether computer will bring unemployment. So the issues were quote unquote secular issues like computerization, technologization. When Sam Pitroda came, he was advocating telecommunication of whole India, and he actually founded what we today use as mobile phones and rest of the telecommunication. So the issues were those, like, science determined by science and technology. In fact, his mission was called Technology Mission. Sam Pitroda was in charge of Technology Mission. And that issue was cleaning Ganga, getting malaria eradicated, bringing in computer, bringing in telecommunication, changing the syllabus of education and bringing in more science and scientific temper to the education. Today, cut to today, we are removing Mughals from the history. Now, I don't understand what do they mean by removing Mughals from the history. Because if you remove Mughals from the history, who did Shivaji fight? That means you'll have to remove Aurangzeb, so even Shivaji will go. So what is this kind of thing? And today it is actually happening in Gujarat, textbooks and UP textbooks, much of the thing they have removed. Like in Red Fort, that site, light and sound show, they have, after 1857, no freedom movement, no Gandhi, and suddenly it is Subhash Chandra Bose and mainly Narendra Modi after that. So, even in Red Fort, this is the situation. So, again, to repeat ad nauseum, at which point the illiberalism began. I have my own hypothesis, like he has so many very good hypotheses. I think my hypothesis may have only 10% or 20% worth, but even then I think, since that is not mentioned here or indirectly mentioned here, I will just put it across. I think, relatively speaking, there was no so much of wealth generation globally and exchange of wealth globally, particularly wealth generation and exchange of wealth, before, let us say, 1980-90. Wealth generation, which began, I think many people here might remember, I was a journalist all my life. So I have covered the strikes, not strikes of the textile workers or mine workers only, strikes by bank employees, strikes by insurance employees, strikes by journalists ourselves. I used to be on strike. I was in fact the leader of the strike in Economic Times. So who are they? They are all middle class, white collar people who are on strike. I know their income at 1971, when Garibi Hatao slogan was there. What was the income of an average bank employee, average teacher, average professor, average journalist, average insurance employee? What was the salary? You count. Many people can imagine it here. Cut to 1981. Fundamentally, nothing much has changed. Little bit incremental change. 1991, slightly more incremental change with globalization coming and socialism failing. But in 2001, between 1991 and 2001, there is spurt. And between 2001 and 2011, suddenly, today average head of the department in routine college gets something like 1,75,000 to 1,80,000 salary. Those days, even the heads of department would join the march on streets of Mumbai to demand more pay. And more pay means they were not drawing, nobody was drawing more than 20,000, 22,000. Even the head of the department would be, I think, 25,000 rupees maximum in a reputed college. But suddenly we find, about which he mentioned, and that's why I said indirectly he has, the kind of new middle class that is born. And according to me, this new middle class is the vehicle of intolerance. New middle class is the promoter of violence. New middle class is a defender of violence. New middle class is a defender of communalism. New middle class is defender of individualism at the expense of society. New middle class, according to me, is a quote-unquote criminal of the new illiberalism. I'll just explain this, without otherwise you'll say I'm biased. I belong to the middle class. In that sense, even I am guilty. But the point is, this new middle class came into being. I'll just give you again, repeat that example of people wanting to go to America. Today, 95, if not more, % of Indians in America are proud Hindus. They want Ayodhya Mandir to be built. They want nationalism. Nehru is nonsense. Nehru and Gandhiji were useless people. Gandhiji told us to surrender. Gandhiji was a coward and Nehru ruined it. Nehru ruined all communication between the Hindus and Muslims. Anti-Hindu he was. Gandhiji was anti-Hindu. All this is done by people. And said India is corrupt, education is useless. They give reservations to people. All those people who are saying this today are the beneficiaries of the same education system. They got their BTech degree and MTech degree and BE or whatever and became computer engineers thanks to Rajiv Gandhi. At that time when Rajiv Gandhi introduced computer, every left and right person was saying computer is bad and computer should be banned. Computer should be banned. Bank employees and railway employees struck work to ban computers. All their children are in Silicon Valley today. All children of those who protested against computer and protested against Rajiv Gandhi are in Silicon Valley. And after going there, they don't even recognize this past. That Y2K happened because, Y2K successfully happened for Indians was because of computerization. They don't want to recognize that. Today they are Hindus. Proud Hindus, all of them. 95% if not more Indians in US. When I went first to US in the mid-80s, there were only about 8 lakhs less Indians there. Today there are something like 48 to 50 lakh. 48 to 50 lakh, and I can tell you, out of this 48 to 50 lakh, 40 lakhs are against Nehru, Gandhi, secularism, all the ideas which actually took them there. Education. IITs, the fees were less than 600 rupees. Hostel was virtually free. Today, IIT costs you something like in lakhs of rupees to become BTech. That time they got all this free because education was considered as a right. Without describing it as a right, education was extremely cheap. My entire matriculation happened in perhaps less than 800 to 1000 rupees from 4th standard onwards. Less than 1000 rupees. Because fees were 5 rupees, 6 rupees. And people or boys and girls who could not afford 5 or 6 rupees, they were given immediate free shifts in the schools. What happened? The same people are talking different language. These people are the beneficiaries of liberal society, beneficiaries of welfare society, beneficiaries of secularism, beneficiaries of parliamentary democracy and secular democracy and sovereignty and Gandhian and Nehru's ideology today are against that. They are not different people. What has happened is only their economic status has increased and their age has grown. Same people. They were 20 then, today they may be 60. One point. Second point, and then I will hand over to him. Just look at 50 years ago. 50 years ago, in 1972, there was a huge anti-war movement in the United States. Huge. In front of Kent University, students were killed. 4 students were killed by the soldiers in America. They were protesting against Vietnam War. They were demanding all the liberty, equality, fraternity in the university campuses in 1972. The same spirit of liberty, equality, fraternity spread to Europe. Europe also participated in anti-war movement. There was a counterculture movement, not just Black Panther, counterculture movement. Feminist movement belongs to same period. It was in 1975, Kate Millett wrote the Sexual Politics book. So feminist movement, ecology movement, Black Panther movement, anti-war movement, all that was there, that was considered at the peak point of liberal cause, and people were defending liberal cause. 1972, Indira Gandhi inaugurated in Stockholm the conference which was known at that time Earth Conference. Today we talk of climate change. That all began again 1972. So 50 years ago, the world was not only liberal, it was rebelliously liberal. It was defending rebelliously that no conservative element should enter our society. They were fighting conservatism when it had not come like today. And yet today we see that 50 years later, conservatism has won. The right wing has won. The left wing is defeated. Liberal ideas are gone. They don't want ideas also nowadays. They don't want, forget idealism, they don't want even ideas. So idealism and ideas both are out, and now everybody has a closed mind. I know what happened. Today it is impossible. Many people must be experiencing this with relatives, with old classmates. It is impossible to even raise an issue. You can't debate. The moment you raise some, you seem to be bloody Nehruvian. You must be Gandhian. All that you want, bakwas, all corruption, all reservation, all that Muslim appeasement you want. You can't even raise, you are not even raised that subject. But the moment you start dialoguing, conversing, you are condemned. So that kind of complete dialogueless society we have become. And it has happened in last, particularly, let us say, in India, in last 15-20 years, particularly after the destruction of Babri Masjid and later on Gujarat riots. But overall, it has happened in last, let us say, 20 years. And the question is, why illiberalism suddenly, which was at the peak in the 70s, suddenly collapsed? And now we are heading towards utterly illiberal societies world over. My explanation is because the same people who had relatively lower economic status and understood the management of their personal and family and national economy with limited means and maximum intellectual or emotional or if you will, spiritual gain. Today, all the spirituality means only religious bakwas, nothing more. And what is that transformation? I think it is the generation of wealth in last 40 years. That generation of wealth is thanks primarily to technology and corporatization of economies. It has gone beyond the state level. It has gone beyond the social level. I don't see any social group coming together to start a school. All the schools that I studied in around us were created not by government. They were all created by freedom fighters, later on social workers. They went house to house, collected donations and started schools, started colleges also. Many colleges today are actually product of that social altruism. That has gone. I think it is necessary to understand at which point it disappeared. Not that we should go back, as you correctly said. We cannot go back to that point, but then we know where the cancer entered. So if we know where the cancer entered, perhaps we can remove with modern technology that particular cancerous area and start making a new liberal society, perhaps with new definitions but old understanding. Thank you.
Sure.
And then we'll open it to the floor.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Kumar, for that very passionate. I can see the pain, and we share that angst and anxiety that all of us are going through. That the sudden rise of illiberalism, but I think more than thinking in terms of what point, I think we'll have to look at the character of this illiberalism is very different from the kind of illiberalism that you refer to in terms of Holocaust and one, this has become more social. I think most of those examples that you have is state initiated, whether it's Vietnam War, whether it's Holocaust, they were state initiated. Today I think societies, collectives are coming across as extremely illiberal. So I think we'll have to, one, it's true that it's illiberal, but one has to see if all of this can be thrown away, in terms of illiberality, But are there social processes that we need to understand as to why people are responding the way they are doing this, You're right in saying it's middle class, but this illiberality is not restricted to middle class. Now today, caste groups, look at the voting patterns, 33% of Dalits and 42% of OBCs have voted for the BJP.
I didn't mean only middle class, the whole society.
Also, but they are the champions.
Led by respectability has come because of the middle class.
True, that's true. So So I think we'll have to look at the social character of this illiberality as to where it has, or what it means. One, as you rightly said, I think one, that old kind of moral constraints that we built on, like Gandhiji's idea of satyagraha, the self-restraint. Gandhiji completely kept emphasizing. I think post-neoliberalism, there is no space for self-restraint. It's effeminate, and you're a loser if you think of self-restraint. So there is this aggressive. I think neoliberalism has made a big difference. The economic reforms introduced, I think on one hand it led to more growth, pulling out more people. But in terms of social ethics, I think this marketization, market fundamentalism destroyed that very idea of shared ethos. Now look at our quality of neighborhoods. Delhi, where I live, there's no sense of neighborhood. Every person is seen as a potential enemy. So this, what is visible politically, is coming from somewhere else in terms of social ethos that have come, I think. And this is, I think, one point that if you want, since you emphasize at what point, I would say it's 1991. Post-neoliberalism, throwing open markets, withdrawal of state from social welfareism. The point you made, education under Nehru was a public good. And today education is completely, there's a crass commercialization. There is no basic assurance of health. I mean, even middle class. Now, my parents had COVID. They were in for a week. We had a 6 lakh bill. So even for a middle class, this is not a small amount. So you're continuously living in a sense of anxiety, insecurity. You're almost living always as if you're on the edge of social life. I mean, we look affluent and comfortable, but at any moment you might drop. Zygmunt Bauman, a sociologist, makes this point that why does Europe hate immigrants? And he says one of the reasons is that immigrants are an uncomfortable reminder that you can become like them anytime. That this assurance of comfortable living is a mirage that all of us are living in. One wrong disease, you suffer from cancer, that's the end of your life. 30, 40, 50 lakhs, and not many of us can even afford that kind of. You'll have to maybe sell out your house, maybe sell out your ancestral property. So this angst that neoliberalism has created, pushing away from public goods, I think at least education and health immediately has to be brought back into complete public good. That's one thing that we can put an end to this illiberalism. I think that social anxiety created by this, as I said, on one hand you have social democratization when everyone wants quality education. And on the other hand, you have completely pushed education, quality education, out of the affordability of 90% of the population groups. So with this mismatch, obviously it's understandable why people would become illiberal. Because today, they feel that only that kind of an aggressive response is the way they can get social mobility. Not like the Gandhian method, if you become spiritual, you just fall out of way. You become nobody. It's only that you have to continuously, I think that's where I think even Modi's persona becomes attractive, that from rags to riches kind of a story. His story is the story of the Indian lower middle class, that unless you are that unscrupulous, unless you manipulate the system, unless you break rules, you can't make it big. That I think we'll have to, as liberals, take responsibility that why did we dismantle, instead of building a robust social welfare system, we dismantled it.
It slightly begs the question again, like you said neoliberalism came with the new value system. At which point did neoliberalism came and why we accepted it? The people who accepted neoliberalism were the liberal, secular, democratic people who accepted neoliberalism. So that actually again repeats begging the same question. And another point I think we should highlight in this context is, while talking about the so-called charisma of Modi, which I don't believe is there, it is only an image and propagated by him. Why, if his charisma is there and same social media and the same mobile phone, same television and same images that he puts across, South is not impressed. In Tamil Nadu, he is not at all a hero. In Kerala, he doesn't exist. In Telangana and Andhra, there may be local parties, but he doesn't exist. In Karnataka, he pretended he existed, which showed that actually he doesn't exist. So his pretension has gone. Maharashtra, he has managed some maneuvering, but he has not really done it. In Bengal, he was shown the floor. In Punjab, he could not succeed. They call themselves a national party. They are only in UP and Gujarat. The so-called national party is only in UP and Gujarat, not even in Bihar. Not even in the entire Hindi belt. So they call themselves a Hindi belt phenomenon. So Modi's charisma, or the so-called perception that he is charismatic and a great orator, is all fake. That also is a complete fake. Whether some people like it here or not is a different matter. Some people will not like because they are illiberal, so it doesn't matter. So be that as it may, the point is we have to recognize.
No, but what people like is that it is fake. That is the problem.
That is well said. That is absolutely well said. I think one basic value system that has entered even before neoliberalism formally set in was the wrong interpretation of being individual. There is difference between individualism, individuality. Individuality is what we should promote. Everybody has a different creative approach, artistic approach. His individuality is different. Individualism is actually a reflection of that neoliberal ideology even before it came. And that's why all the management colleges, in my school or college, I never heard the term called killer instinct. Nowadays in management schools, they tell you, if you want to succeed in corporate or non-corporate, you must have killer instinct. So Modi has that killer instinct. He kills people actually. So killer instinct is what you should have. And killer instinct, who can have powerful killer instinct? It is with strong individualism. So individualism actually infected the minds primarily of the middle class. It went further because it is epidemic. So that epidemic went further to OBCs, which is everywhere. But individualism was injected with a wrong idea, mistaking individuality for individualism. And I think time has come for us to, and it will come. I mean, we can be sure that people will get soon realize that what they are doing is quite nonsense. And like Germans realized it after 15 years, India may take less or more years, but India will also recognize that what they did was wrong. And actually today, I just took I'll just take 2 minutes. As many as 36 countries out of 43 in Europe are either right-wing, elected autocracies or authoritarian. In Europe, which actually told India that it is a duty to civilize us. So they came here to civilize us, and that's how they are actually. Similarly, it is not as if the entire Islamic world was illiberal. In Iraq, girls were driving trucks and girls were teaching, nurses, doctors, engineers, and it was made into an Islamic state by the American invasion. So similarly, Israel and Palestine issue became more and more illiberal over the years, when initially there were so many Israelis who wanted to recognize Palestine, and in fact there was a joint movement at one point of time. So I think the approach that Islamic countries are illiberal, today the fundamentalism of European kind or American kind, racist kind, is also in Europe. I mean, why we should call only Islamic countries as fundamentalist? India is becoming fundamentalist. I mean, in fact, if you tell some Hindutva guy that you are behaving like a Talibani, his reply is, so what? वो कहते हैं ना तो हम भी करेंगे. So his approach is not, oh my God, I must think I should not become Talibani. So that introspection is completely gone. And I think that is because of that kind of individualism which does not recognize the social milieu outside his personal career, personal life. That everybody cannot have great personal career, everybody cannot have great economic wealth. So I think that realization will come via unemployment and price rise, which therefore I welcome it. In a very negative, unemployment will at least teach them a lesson, or price rise will teach them a lesson. So far it has not. No. So far petrol has gone up to 125 rupees, but nothing. Today I am told dollar is 96 rupees. Today dollar went to 96. I am told, you know why? Because many people went directly to buy dollars with the 2,000 rupee notes. Because they cannot go to bank, they can use that 2,000 rupee note to buy dollars. So lots of bags with so many 2,000 rupee notes went, and dollar. So that is, anyway, that kind of thing. I think I should not be taking more time. 6:35. We've got 20 minutes for audience to respond, react, question, whatever.
Good evening, sir, and thank you both of you. Sir, I actually have two questions.
First, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm.
Introduce yourself and then.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm Ashok. I teach in Maharashtra National University, and my question to Ajay sir is, Dr. Ajay sir is, like a lot of time it is said that liberalization got crushed like a kind of black hole itself, because the kind of fruits of liberalism which were distributed in the course of time were actually exclusive. So liberalism is kind of a good, I would say it's a sugar coated actually illiberalism in itself, like capitalism, exclusive treatments to the fruit eaters of liberalism, and it's kind of a bit of a wokeism, okay, unpractical, and actually the people who failed in other way went to liberalism to try their luck. So, and my second question is the parameter for liberalism and illiberalism has to be based on the frame of reference of Eurocentrism. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Tushar Gandhi. I have a comment to make more of than anything. You said about we becoming more culturally, cultural societies become, and that is one of the root causes of illiberalism. But don't you think it's more of because we've become a consumptive, consumerist society which has fostered this whole thing of, instead of vice, selfishness has become a virtue. Where, you gather everything that you can, more than what you require, even if you have to take it away from somebody else. And that's been legitimized. Isn't that an illiberal attitude which has actually made illiberalism acceptable? Because I remember one used to be illiberal behind closed doors. Now you shout it out from the balconies and rooftops. Isn't that a consumerist society that has been projected as a hallmark of booming economies contributed massively to this selfish illiberalism?
It's more like a thought that I actually cultivated while listening to you right now is, you had a point there saying that age of emotions. Age of emotion. I feel more likely the emotion that is prevailing right now is the age of fear. When I say age of fear, I would probably pin it down to three things that I just thought of. One is the incumbent system or the incumbent government is trying to create a fear that, if you are not on my side, it's either my way or the highway. Second fear that comes to that kind of people, that they say, whether I say something or whether I do something or not, it's just going to be the same again. And there are probably, the fear that creates probably Newton's third law of motions, like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That someone like us, people like us who, if you try to create fear in us, we're going to fight it back to you. So I think we are living more in the age of fear is what my thought is. And I'm going to say it in this way, that illiberalism is a tool of fear. So when you start projecting illiberalism, you set it as a fear in the minds of people. When I say that, I would give example of, currently they're saying what you eat, what you should dress, what you should see. So if you show this kind of illiberalism, you set a fear in the minds of people that if you're not with me, you don't get anything. And if you're with me, you can still get away with whatever you're doing. So I think we are living more in the age of fear. That's the emotion that's prevailing in the country at the moment.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sameer Dalwai. I'm a developmental pediatrician. I work with child psychology. It was fascinating to hear you speak because when you spoke about it from a political science point of view, or at the community and the world at large, I could identify with each and every child we see, and the same way the emotions reflect in the child, and how when you project at a larger level, it's happening at a daily level in the life of each and every child, each and every home. And when we talked about illiberalism, everything that, sir, you also mentioned about individualism versus individuality, it was so nice. Every parent now wants their child to have that killer instinct. So you don't have to go to MBA college for it. The parents themselves feel that my child. So I have often parents who come and tell me, मेरा बच्चा स्कूल से मार खा के आता है, मैं बोलता हूँ तू मार के आ. Parents tell me, आप बताओ उसको हम कैसे बोले कि he can exert his right through violence. Now if parents, I'm changing the paradigm from political science to parenthood. If parents want their child to grab and want him to be violent, how then can we ever go ahead and have a liberal society?
Sorry, sir, I just forgot to introduce myself. My name is Clyde Crasto, and I'm the national spokesperson of the Nationalist Congress Party, NCP.
Hello. So thank you both of you and the organizers. We all will go richer today. And I have been thinking about a lot of things, as sir always gives us a lot of things to think and critically think. You have mentioned, sir, about, and in my introduction, I am Dr. Vritant. I teach politics at KC College, and I'm also a student of Ajay, sir. So, sir, I have been your student, and I think I know what you have been thinking for a long time. And this thinking which you are doing today about populism and now about the politics of emotions, I see that you are living today and you are thinking today. And today, while you were speaking, you mentioned fraternity. And practically thinking, fraternity has been talked about for a long time, and we know how Dr. Ambedkar related fraternity in Indian context. But politically, theoretically, we know what fraternity is. But is it really possible in today's India? And if it is, please let us know through political, theoretical way, how is it possible? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. There are 2 more questions.
I'm Bharat Doshi, a retired corporate executive. I'm echoing the sentiment expressed earlier about the fear and the element of fear which prevails. And very nicely put that it is fear if you are against me, then it is fear that something will happen to me. Or if you are with me, then whatever I do wrong, it will still be protected. That both the aspects in the environment is one part of the thing. But what is worrying is when institutions get influenced, whether it be the courts, and that's where in your theory and thing I was watching as to at which point did this part of thing started. It was not in 91 or 2011 or 2012. When did it start? That kind of a fear that institutions are now partial. This is something which I thought of.
Hello. Hi, I am Ajit. I am a management college professor. I have a couple of questions, observations. First thing is the slide that you had put on the screen was absolutely wonderful. I think it covered pretty much everything that's happening wrong or right with the society. So I really appreciate that. Now, there are 2 things. One thing is in the emergence of illiberalism, or rather I would say in the defeat of old liberalism, if I may say so. What I observe more than often is there is a kind of failure, or there is a kind of sense of disappointment with the kind of liberalism that existed in 60s, 70s, the times that Ketkar sir was talking about, And that disappointment, that disillusionment is prevalent not only amongst the general masses, but I have, more often than not, I have come across a lot of veterans of those particular movements or political parties or thought leaders who were very active in all those years. But today they feel that disillusionment, and that disillusionment is not about the illiberalism that has today taken shape. They have a lot of disillusionment and disappointment about their own activities, their own leaders, their own colleagues, a lot of differences of opinion which led to frustration, depression. So somewhere that 60s, 70s, 80s liberalism, stroke socialism, stroke communism, stroke congressism for that matter, has it somewhere failed, and that has given rise to this present scenario? That was my first question. And second thing is, as I said, that slide was wonderful and pretty much covered everything. The only thing that probably being me myself a chartered accountant, I believe that some light can be thrown on the change of financial structures of the society in general. For example, in case of subprime crisis, there were bar girls or there were pole dancers who had borrowed to purchase 4 or 5 different houses. So the financial inclusion, which obviously we must support, there is no doubt on that, but the financial inclusion, the financial percolation, there was an article an year back now, because of all these policies, the crypto markets have gone down, but there were a lot of crypto apps 1 year back. And there was a report which said that 75% of the customers of those crypto apps were coming from B-towns. They were coming from non-metro. And it was a large segment of youngsters between the age group of 19 to 25, which was contributing, which was member of those crypto apps, which were trading 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 rupees on it. So this particular dimension, if you could put it in your overall theory, then I think, it would be very interesting. Thank you.
One last question. And when I mentioned dollar, it was on the curve, not official rate. That is the black rate. Yeah, please. He has been raising hand before. So, then that will, okay, then your question will be the last.
Dr. Sir, thank you very much for a very enlightening lecture. I'm Gautam Thakur. Basically, if you look at political science, today we have the descendants of Thomas Hobbes all around us, authoritarian. We have all talked about the ills of it, but why is it that in spite of this illiberalism, there are no proponents of liberal society coming up in front of us? Let us understand that in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, after John Locke, there was this movement of democracy which swept the world over 3 centuries. And today we have democracies, but they are authoritarian democracies or right-wing democracies. The inability of the thought of liberalists to, find a leader. Today you can talk of Erdogan, Putin, or, all the names that we took about. But there are no heroes for the liberal movement. And how does one ask that question? Because ultimately, any idea has to be led.
Now that is truly last. Oh, okay. From ladies section, nobody is asked. Yeah.
Thanks for the perceptive presentation as well as...
Please introduce.
Yeah, Sunil Tambe, independent journalist. Thanks for the perceptive presentation, and Kumar's, of course, Chairman's remarks. One thing that I found, I gathered from this whole interaction between you and Kumar, is that democracy has been hijacked by the elites. That's actually. Therefore, illiberalism is growing. That's what we can gather. The question here is, everywhere democracy has been hijacked, and there is serious discussion over deliberative democracy, not only in democratic countries, but also in China and where there is autocratic rule or military. So will you please throw some light on illiberalism or growing illiberalism, and answer to it is about deliberative democracy. Thank you.
Good evening, sir. It was wonderful listening to both of you. What I could gather is somehow neoliberalism has emerged as a villain somehow. And, somehow it also shows dystopian features. Because I'm thinking of Orwell when he says, under the chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me. So this entire environment of, mistrust, fear. So are we looking towards a dystopian future? I would like to know from you. Thank you.
Over to you. Oh.
Will be the last. Myself, Sham Gulwe from Faculty Political Science from Maharashtra National Law University. So my question is, as you discuss here, why has the world become so illiberal? You discuss the nuances of that. My question is, what is the solution to these all, these all issues? Actually, we are moving towards the next decade and, next age. So what is exactly the solution? As Marx said that all hatred in the world discuss the word. The real question is how to change it. My question is how to change it. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks to all these great questions and very difficult. So it's difficult questions to answer. The range is huge, but I'll club them. I don't think I think also want of time. So one big question that has emerged through different deliberations is this very crisis of liberalism, that it's Eurocentric and that there are problems within liberalism itself. So why should we actually become more liberal? Maybe it's something good in becoming illiberal. I mean, you didn't say that, but that's what the question is interrogate. But that's partly true, that I think the current, what we are calling illiberalism, I think part of the anger is a legitimate anger. I think we have to recognize that all of this is not hatred and toxic masculinity and Islamophobia. I mean, we will be missing the point if we equate all of that anger. It is a different matter that the right is converting that legitimate anger into toxic majoritarianism and Islamophobia. But there are definitely legitimate sources as to why people should be angry. So if you take liberalism, the question many of you asked, therefore people are angry with institutions, for instance. That institutions have been exclusive in India. Look at the social composition of institutions. Even very inclusive institutions like JNU comes across as an elite institution. So when somebody comes along, and says that I'm going to destroy these institutions, there is suddenly a mass consent, or there is at least a mass indifference to that attack on institutions. We as liberals are, aghast at what they have done to JNU. But in the general public, there is not much of an angst. That we are unable to mobilize that angst among people towards whether it's the educational institutions, whether it is courts, whether it is liberal democratic institutions, whether the way parliament has been treated. Look at the placid response to even Rahul Gandhi's disqualification. We would have expected in a democracy of this size, the most important leader of opposition being disqualified in an unfair manner should have led. But we'll have to understand there is a deep sense of indifference people towards these institutions because they have not delivered the way they should. So what is very strange to add further to that is, well, subaltern caste and classes are unhappy that these institutions have not delivered, therefore they're angry. The social elites are angry with constitution because it thinks that they have made it too reformist and too much of social democratization has happened. That subalterns, Dalits, OBCs are asserting today over us. So they are angry for a different reason. So we are in one sense in a very unique historical movement where both social elites are angry with constitution, subalterns are angry with constitutions. Social elites do not have trust in institutions, subaltern castes do not have trust in institutions. That is precise reason why this kind of a demagoguery is finding a resonance, cutting across caste and classes. That there is no barrier, there is no regional, there is no caste which does not celebrate. So we'll have to go back that there was a genuine crisis of liberalism and it's a legitimate anger. So once you read, then we can raise different set of questions that then what do we do out of it? If all of this is not an illegitimate illiberalism and just hatred and all of that, then we'll have to ask that what are the other ways in which we can tap this anger. So that's where I think certain liberal principles might be useful, but obviously we'll have to rework all of that, how else to accommodate this growing anger. So therefore in my previous book on populism, I end by saying that populism might throw demagoguery, but all of populism is not bad. Because it is reminding of certain crisis that was very evident, which was not evident during Nehruvian era. I think that the comfort of Nehruvian liberalism was that there was this huge, humongous gap between social elites and subalterns. So I think the liberalism had a comfort zone there. But today when 50 years of democratization, when we are actually beginning to see the effects of equality, when we see more Dalits, more OBCs, more women in institutions and public spaces, that is when our anxieties are going up. In Nehruvian era, it was comfortable, sir, to say that we are liberal because we are not challenged by anyone. But today in an institution, when you walk in, as a caste Hindu, you have a Dalit boy or a girl doing better than you, you're not prepared for that. your social ethos are not prepared. You feel challenged. So that's where I think of the failure of liberalism. And therefore I say that there is no way that we can go back to Nehruvian liberalism because Nehruvian liberalism had that buffer. And the even Gandhian ethos had that buffer of humongous social inequalities. Therefore, I always argue that equality is a very romantic ideal at a distance. But when equality comes close to us, it becomes Frankenstein. We are all scared of equality because you are being challenged. You are being challenged at home by your partners and wives. You are challenged in centers by your non-caste Bahujan colleagues. Bahujan colleagues challenge you with new knowledge systems. So you are being challenged everywhere. And that's the anxiety that caste Hindu social elites have been absolutely unprepared for this kind of an inclusion. And that's part of the reason why I think there's no way we should go back to that old liberalism, but reread this sense of, this anger, where it is coming from, and then see what kind of an alternatives can we really think about. And Tushar's, I think, is a good question in terms of consumerism is in fact, I think it's a very big issue. But if you look at the way we often frame this whole consumption and consumerism, for instance, the way you have framed it in terms of selfishness and growing acquisitive nature. But I would request you that let's look at this process from bottom up. How would those who have led lives in absolute denial, they look at this consumption as some kind of a new mobility? The fact that somebody who is socially ostracized in a village now comes to the suburbans of Bombay and has a mobile phone, that looks liberating to him. So if you tell them, so that's problem with our liberal left, that's where we are ending up with problem. If you tell him, this is all selfishness, he's not going to listen to us. Because for him, that old Gandhian ethic of self-restraint was actually the source of his oppression, was actually the source of his exclusion. That's why that's not working, that old liberal moral restraint, and that's why, as I said, Modi looks attractive because he symbolizes this kind of breaking all restraint. Kisi ka sunna ki zarurat nahi. Do whatever works for you. In that kind of a context, we'll have to read in our own, we have been such an unequal society in terms of caste and class. Therefore, consumption looks like a new liberating force. That at least consumption gives you certain kind of a social equality with others. You also have a TV like a upper caste guy. You also have a mobile like women have mobiles like men. So this all looks like social mobility. In that kind of a context, it's becoming difficult for us to critique consumption. But in a different way, you're right that marketization is leading to a different kind of. So we are in an absolutely very complex scenario because of which we'll have to rethink this entire project as to what is our entry point. Where do we begin? Even third set of questions I think a lot of you have asked in terms of fear. That's I think it's an empirical fact that we are living in a society of fear. All of us, for instance, have those who are speaking are having some case or the other we have to fight. But the more complex and disturbing thing is not that this regime is breathing down fear, which is an understandable thing. That's in its social character if you look at its ideological frame. but the consent that is being generated out of fear. That's the more disturbing part, that why is that people are not resisting? Why do people not want to live? Because we were often told that we are not like Islamic societies. Hinduism is a fairly liberal language. We are very porous. Hindus is a very disorganized, localized. But today, people don't seem to resist that kind of a fear, resist that kind of a centralization. There is a mass indifference to many of the things that we are seeing. We were discussing outside, Tushar and others, with the journalists, that why when institutions are being attacked, when BJP buys MLAs from other parties, people are indifferent to a lot of things. So I think the more disturbing aspect is the nature of consent that has been created out of fear. This entire securitization discourse, look at what's happening in Uttar Pradesh. I mean, the entire regime is going to win elections, pitch for election 24 on a securitization discourse based on extrajudicial violence. And there's a mass consent. I talked to a lot of auto drivers, in front of my house is an auto stand. Most of them are from UP. I buy from a farmer's market, most of them are from UP. And you would be shocked at the celebration of Yogi. All of you, देखो कि जो गलत कर रहा है उसको ठोक दे रहे, वो सही है, और कितने दिन केस तो चलता रहता, कुछ नहीं होगा, पकड़ो ठोक दो. And this part of it obviously has been a bitter failure of our institution, judicial system. But this idea that what is generating fear is being celebrated, then where do you go? I mean, what is the discourse that you generate? This whole liberal thing, rule of law, separation of powers, judiciary, they will say that that has not delivered. Let's agree to that, that has not delivered. It was all based on caste coalitions, whether of Yadavs, whether this about Muslim, extrajudicial thing, whatever was happening on the ground, that has not delivered, that has not worked. So today to stand up and ask people to resist fear has become extremely difficult, because they are seeing a different meaning in that fear. They are saying that, demonetization, an absolutely brainless decision. But people celebrate it. When people thought that it is, people के पास वैसे ही पैसे नहीं है, तो demonetization करने में कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ा. They thought that rich are suffering. So my auto driver told me, sir, आप देखिए, rich लोग कितना डर रहे हैं बाहर घर से निकलने. So people like this, elite is being targeted. So the BJP, if you look at not what they are doing, but if you look at what they are saying, they are getting those notes right. They almost look like a class war. They are the new Maoists who are mobilizing a class war against, they are carrying out a cultural revolution. That is the optics they are giving. And of course doing something else, serving Adani in the name of a class war. So we cannot simply first hand reject all of that. We'll have to get those tone and terror as to why people are celebrating this regime the way they do. And that's where I think there are points that we may have to pick up. And Rutan, you raised a very important question of fraternity. I think Dr. Ambedkar's continuous, he on one hand spoke of liberty, he spoke about equality, he spoke about Buddhism, but I think one point that he never missed emphasizing was we need fraternity. If caste, not only for caste, for justice. And in fact, Ambedkar was, I think, his deep concern was towards justice. It was not just a caste, was only one means of anti-caste. But today, as you rightly pointed out, we do not know what is the social form of that fraternity. Since we do not have a concrete social form, a language of a common Hindu identity seems to be attracting people. But I see something positive in that, sir. That the fact that you want certain kind of a larger civil solidarity, that cuts across caste. Our question should be, what is that we are offering people in terms of other forms of larger universal, normative universal civil solidarity forms? Nationalism is a great force. Robert Ballard, sociologist, says that nationalism is the new religion. It gives people that sense of faith to come together under something that they can trust, that is moral, that is culturally driven. Liberalism cannot give any of that. Liberalism is only rational, deliberative, institutional procedures that cannot absorb our emotions, that cannot absorb our ethical sensibilities. So we will have to manufacture new ethics of nationalism. We have been, I would say, too much of rejectionist. We rejected religion in public life, we rejected myths, we rejected mythologies, we rejected nationalism, we rejected emotions, we rejected ethics, we didn't want to deliberate on values. All that has been today taken over by right. I think that's where I think perhaps this whole language of scientific temper has that deep limitation, that institutional, legal, rational sensibilities cannot absorb people's existential ways of life. Therefore, I think there is something deeply positive in what's happening in spite of all its toxic thing, that I feel that this same ethics that underlie this current moment will also overthrow this current regime. Because I think there is something positive about the ethics that are driving people, and legitimate anger against system. For instance, the way BJP is using that anger against local leadership, but they're manipulating it. They're mobilizing one caste against other, but that anger is legitimate. Once they see that they're riding a tiger, once they see that that vision that they're mobilizing is not realizing, you will see the regime might collapse faster than it has grown. The Karnataka, I think, could be one big starting point, because I see the deep ethics that they're mobilizing, there's a lot of potential in them. And I think once they see that this regime does not really represent what it has been talking about, people might rebel. It might happen that we might see a different kind of a regime altogether. But the regime that has to come has to be qualitatively very, very different. And finally, to your question that what is the solution, we often critique. So I say that the starting point is, in Indian context, to bring back social welfare state. That should be that there is no shying away from that. I think if there's an alternative regime in 2024, we need to move beyond this transactional welfareism. Kabhi ki sanitary pad, computers, bicycles, lollipops, all this is good. It looks attractive. But I think what we need is that today we have an aspirational, socially democratized society, and to actually realize that potential, you need massive public goods in terms of, I think I would say in education, KG to PG, free education to all. State should invest at least 10% of GDP in education and health. This whole crass commercialization of education, corporatization of health has played havocs with our life, and that's what is partly represented in this whole toxic Islamophobia and all that. And basic income scheme. I would say that these are the three schemes. If we invest, I think there would be a complete immediate change in the mood, in the nature of the debate. I just was in Calicut before coming to Bombay. I flew to Delhi and I came here, and I was speaking alongside Finance Minister, Mr. K.N. Balagopal. We were both speaking at Calicut University. The entire nature of debate with the audience for 2-hour session was on education. Knowledge economy, knowledge society, what are we doing, so what kind of technology, where AI should be, and people were continuously asking. There is no Muslim, Hindu, this, that. So once you have literacy, once you have social welfare, people ask different set of questions. Part of problem with North has been that there is absolute death of civic imagination. You don't have education, you don't have basic health facilities, but you have a chief minister who goes to Kerala and tells that Kerala should learn about health from Uttar Pradesh. What can be bigger? I think we should end on that note.
Thanks. The conversation is over from our end.
A very interesting conversation indeed. And this is exactly what Chavan Center is expecting, creating this platform as a dialogue. I think today we had a wonderful dialogue over here, discussion, debate, agreeing to disagree, and various perspectives also coming in from various fields. So I'm Dipti Nakle, the CEO of Yashwantrao Chavan Center, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you on behalf of Supriya Tai, Honorable Supriya Tai. She couldn't be here today, but I'm sure she's there on Facebook watching us live because she doesn't miss any session. And here we have a group of different representations. We have journalists, authors, bankers, doctors, and many stalwarts over here. And we are very glad that we have such a crowd coming here. I would just mention a few names. Mr. Tushar Gandhi, Sahil Joshi, Kunal Vijayakar, Pratap Asbeji, Gautam Thakurji, Deepak Ratan, Satyajit Tambe, Sahil Joshi,
And yes, thanks a lot for the speaker, Dr. Ajay ji, for coming all the way from Delhi and making this conversation very interesting. And Kumar Ketkar ji for your valuable time towards this dialogue. So I would like to thank also Nehru Center for giving this platform for discussion on world affairs, and my Chavan Center team. Of course, all the audience who are over here, thanks a lot for giving your time, and please keep attending our sessions, which we conduct every month, once every month. So please be there, and do follow us on FB. Also check our website, www.savancenter.org. Thanks again, and we would end this session with a national anthem. Thank you.
It was a very well organized event. This bag here. Nehru is very heavy these days. Yeah, thank you.